Oh, and the other person, Megan, you're presenting with. And Megan, too.
Thank you for
Megan's
that.
great. Talk to
Yeah.
her also.
Wow, that was a great introduction.
Sorry,
I
Megan, I
was
don't know you
actually
that
going to
well.
introduce you and say that you were the most popular person in the room, but now I feel like I've confirmed that. So, but Megan Stevens, I'm the director of the sales team for Best Buy Ads. So we just recently launched Best Buy's retail media network publicly for the first time this year. And I'll let Travis introduce himself.
Yeah, hi, Travis. So I am at Inspire Brands now. So I lead basically all of our media, so paid and owned across all of our brands. Before that, as Josh said, I was at Uber for a long time. I led media globally there across all of our lines of businesses. Before that, I was actually in 10 Hudson Yards before this building even existed, working with Michael. So I ran the media department at Vayner under Gary Vaynerchuk, and we won Mondelez, which was fun. And yeah, I was at Twitter before that, which is now I'm torn about what happened yesterday because I'm like, we were trading at 70, and now it's 50 something. So, but yeah, I'm happy to be here.
That's great. And I want to start with just the most important question of the day. So it's Saturday morning, you walk into Dunkin' Donuts. What are you ordering?
So it's a little sacrilegious at my company, but I don't love coffee. So it's just an iced tea. I bring my own because can't get the sliced lemon anymore in Dunkin'. I don't know if anybody knows. So I get my own lemon, and then I'm obsessed with the new avocado toast with the roasted tomatoes. It's so good, and you're like, what avocado toast at Dunkin'? But it's like super clean, super fresh, and it's my go-to.
I agree. I agree. I've also realized I eat a lot of really crappy foods because I really like Oreos, Arby's, all the things. So just getting into what's happening here. So upfronts are happening starting next week. What's exciting to you? What do you think about what are you looking forward to?
Yeah. So we had all of our pre-upfront meetings maybe about a month ago with all the networks. The common theme for me was that streaming is finally taking kind of the center stage. I think that in years past, it's always been like much more about the content, much more about from like a linear side of things, and they're like, oh yeah, we also have this streaming thing that we kind of know what we're doing with. We might be able to monetize it, but we don't really know. I think the fact that live sports now is finally going to be much more accessible from a streaming standpoint. It was the final kind of like straw that broke the theoretical camel's back. So that for me is really just what we're super interested in. Really starting to diversify just like our video mix to much more of an attention metric, right, versus just a reach metric. And also within that, now that so much is going to be streaming, we can be more targeted with our content. Duncan, for example, we actually buy even our linear right now on a segment level, not even a demo level. But now with streaming coming front stage, we're going to be able to do that across all of our brands and actually speak to humans the way that humans should be spoken to. So when we think about multicultural, when we think about a mom in Iowa is very different, right, than like someone who's in New York City just trying to get to work. So we need to be speaking to individuals as human beings, and I think we haven't been able to do that, right, like in linear and TV in so long. But now with streaming really taking like front and center, we're just going to be able to be more purposeful, and we don't have the excuse anymore of like, well, it's TV, it's just reach. It's like, no, you've got to step up. You have to have more creative and content, and it has to be targeted, right, to like who you're talking to.
Which is fascinating from a like how you can target audiences, but then from a complexity standpoint, from a measurement standpoint, how do you think about how to bring all that back to return on ad spend? I mean, I think about just how retail media has kind of shaped and changed how brands think about measurement when they work with Best Buy ads, but I can't imagine that that's an easy feat.
It's tough. I mean, especially right now. I mean, we're thinking like who are or what are our Nielsen alternatives, right? Like going into this year's upfront and also kind of longer term. There's the currency side of it, but then there's also the complete measurement side of it as well. So what we're doing is we're trying to take a step back and understand who are the partners, right? And it's not just a single partner who's going to solve all of this for us, but it's how do we start to understand and combine multiple different metrics across an entire funnel that all kind of start to play with each other. So we're pushing Publicis, which is our agency of record across all of our brands, to push the networks to be able to think differently, right, and accept different currency. But we also have to, depending on where the actual ad is served, we have to be measuring that differently. I think our category as a whole, as well as a lot of other categories, have just like really honed in on this singular version of ROI, right? Like, which is fine. But whenever we're really looking at the difference between what a TV impression does or a video impression does versus like a programmatic display impression, they're fundamentally different. So how are we working with partners to understand when we're pushing consideration, 6 points, right, from a brand lift study, what does that actually mean from like a long tail sales cycle to actually impact ROAS on the bottom line? So there's lots of moving parts, but what we're trying to do is get a very small roster of partners who can play together to be able to measure our entire funnel from top all the way down to bottom, while also building out a lot of stuff ourselves too. That's the cool thing about being Inspire is, we're a private company and we can put resources on some of this stuff, and we're building out a lot of cool shit ourselves too.
That is awesome. So just thinking about all the complexity, you just got into this role 4 months ago.
Yeah.
So I find it fascinating thinking about coming from a brand like Uber, just a singular brand that you're, focused on, to now you have 7 different brands, huge, different audiences. How do you how is that dynamic in your new role?
Yeah, it's why I took the role. So at most brands, right, like media and own sits underneath marketing, right? So a lot of times you'll roll into a CMO. The whole thesis of Inspire is we're bringing together this portfolio of brands that don't really step on each other's toes, right, from a day part standpoint, so they can all work together. And then what we can do best in class is really through a data and a tech first mindset kind of service everyone. So the brands are responsible for how they come to life, right? Whether that be in store, in a TV commercial, through loyalty, like they're really responsible for that experience that you get as a consumer. All of our teams actually sit adjacent to the CMO. So I report into our CEO of Inspire, and my team, insights and analytics, finance, accounting, our job is to take a step back and look at the entire portfolio. What's working well with this brand? How do we actually then implement it over here? How do we figure out what's not working here so that we don't test it over here? The other cool thing is we're building out a singular CDP that our entire audience profile will sit on. So, Michael was inferring a little bit like, yeah, I mean, we're really lucky because we have a lot of data, right? Like we have a lot of loyalty data. We own all point of sale, right, for every single thing that we do. So if I put media out on Friday, I know what it's doing on Saturday. I'm able to see that kind of quick turnaround. But whenever we centralize the entire CDP, where I can understand if someone is a loyalist, right, at Dunkin', but then I can give them an offer to go over to Buffalo Wild Wings, right, for a specific, what the LTV happens is it's like incremental, right? And it's extraordinary how much it goes up. And then the last thing is, I think within our data, there's just so much that we have, but then there's so much that our partners have too. So it's working with the likes of, again, Publicis is our AOR, Epsilon is part of Publicis. So even thinking about how are we enriching segmentation, right? Like through third parties to make our data better ourselves, but then also make our data richer whenever we're actually pushing more targeted media across all of our different channels. So it's kind of a test and learn. Like that's the fun thing is like I get to do really cool, like nimble stuff with Jimmy John's because they're like, yeah, whatever, like do it. And then I can use the leverage and the power of like a Dunkin', right, to actually just do some like really, really cool stuff.
That's fascinating. So on the topic of Dunkin' and all the brands that I adore that you work with, what's new for Inspire Brands? Like, what are you guys focused on next year? What excites you about what you're doing?
Yeah, it's so I'm excited about this singular view of the customer, right? So that we can start to, and this is more my vision versus the company, so we'll see if they let me do it. But it is like cross-selling, right? And it's starting to bring the portfolio together because, like, again, we're so purposeful with the acquisition strategy, and it's been a lot, right? Like, if you think about 4 years ago, our company didn't exist. Last year we made $30 billion. So it's been an intentional growth, but it's also been like as we think about the portfolio, it's just they're fun because they can all play together. You know, you can wake up, you can go to Dunkin', you can get Jimmy John's for lunch, you know, you can get, you know, like Sonic after Friday night football, right? Like at your high school, swing by Baskin Robbins for ice cream later. Like it all just like works. So I'm excited to kind of explore that whole kind of portfolio of brands and working together. I'm also really excited to, you know, and Josh kind of hinted at this a little bit, is pushing us to do more and more, you know, media for good and media for purpose. You know, when I was at Uber, you know, we made sure that a certain percentage of all of our funds, right, were going towards like underrepresented community publisher owners, right, making sure that we were bringing in tons of content creators, right, from underrepresented communities. We have so much power as brands who are spending billions of dollars every year, and if we're not using some of that for good, it's just kind of worthless, right? Like at the end of the day. So I'm excited to do more of that. I'm excited to push more of our money into good, and also just be more intentional and with how we're speaking to humans. We're sitting on so much data, which I'm excited to start to activate against.
Can you go into detail about like any of the partnerships you're doing within the within your charity space or
Yeah, so we're
yeah.
we're just starting to explore it, right? Like within Inspire, but like, you know, historically whenever I was at Uber and stuff that I want to explore, you know, kind of moving forward is, you know, very specifically towards, you know, like Black owned publishers, right? Like a certain percentage of all of our funding would go there, right? And it was usually smaller publishers, and not just siphoning off all of our money over to Google, right? Or all of our money over to a couple platforms, is ensuring that we have a large pot to contribute, right, to the communities that we serve. I think even with out of home, there's a lot of stuff that you can do there too. There's so much new technology with out of home that there's certain paper, right, that actually, you know, like counteracts CO2, right, like through its emissions. Like you can reuse them for like homeless shelters, you know, in different places. You can, you know, at Uber we were looking at like making delivery bags like for our couriers, you know, like out of some of the old stuff. So it's being intentional and reusing that, but like really looking at the audiences that we serve, which, you know, like, you know, the Black audience is super important. We think about like Latinx, LGBTQ, right? Like we have to be representative of our community, and we also have to lean in there as well.
Absolutely. Pivoting back to that concept of like your brands kind of playing off each other, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the partnerships I've seen you do. I'm a big fan of one of them in particular. I was like, Travis, we have to talk about this. It's my favorite. So Elf Cosmetics and Duncan just did a partnership recently. So tell us a little bit about that and how it came to life.
Yeah, it so fun, right? Like I don't wear makeup, but I was like, I need all of it, and it's all on my desk at the office. But yeah, I mean, that was just one. That's one also fun, just because like I think a lot of companies treat partnerships differently, and they'll kind of like put partnerships over here in the corner, and that's all that they're working on. The way that we look at partnerships is it's super fluid, right? Like if the idea comes from the media team, awesome. If it comes from the brand team, amazing. If it comes from the insights team, cool, right? Like the Duncan one actually stemmed from my group. And the insight was really just like, we have to get more leaned in with a younger consumer, right? Like all of our brands, the consumers are aging out. And like, you know, whenever, you know, we started
I feel personally attacked by that.
yeah.
But that's okay.
Yeah, same. But we had to start thinking about like what are those moments, what are those areas that particularly Gen Z was really leaned into. So you know, TikTok obviously was like a huge presence for us, like makeup tutorials there as well. You know, and Elf really stood for a lot of the things that we were trying to kind of like integrate ourselves with, right? So it was super simple. We just had the whole product line. We had this one incredible creator on TikTok who basically like debuted it for us. It sold out in a couple minutes, you know, on Elf's website, on Ulta's website, and it was just cool. It cost us barely anything, but in our PR team won't let me tell you how many free impressions that we got, but it was billions and billions and billions, right? Like just through some really smart collaborations. And that's what we try to do. I mean, even when you look at Arby's, you know, like we just had the Pusha T, you know, diss track that came out, you know, where he was, you know, dissing McDonald's. Hopefully no McDonald's folks are here. You know, and then we also had like the vodka line, you know, with like curly fries, like which is like great in a Bloody Mary, not great by itself. Um, and it's stuff like that that's just like fun and relevant for us to be a part of culture versus us just doing a partnership for like shits and giggles, right? Like it's very purposeful, and when you do it, that you reap the benefits of the organic nature of it. So it's super fun, and we have super fun brands, you know, to do it with.
Well, Travis, this has been awesome. I don't know if we want to pause and open it for questions.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
I was
I can also, because Josh seated it. So what he's talking about is, for me, like kind of long term, I am obsessed with just animal welfare and just like animal rescues as a whole. I grew up on a rescue farm. You know, my first, like the first things I remember is like literally like laying down like with a baby cow, like, and just like realizing what that was. So basically, my whole kind of career, I've kind of dedicated tons of my life to working with both like local as well as national, mainly dog rescues. I did quite a bit because my roles until now have always been completely global. So every time I'd go through APAC, I'd always make sure that I would fly through Seoul, because there's a partnership here with Korean Canine where you actually rescue dogs from the meat markets, and you fly back with them, and then you socialize them here, and then you kind of adopt them out. So I've always been obsessed with all of that. And then, yeah, like as you said, like my goal is not to be selling, you know, coffee and Dunkin', and I love that I'm doing it every single day. But yeah, long term, I want to have a rescue farm. So just kind of bring in all the animals, and that'll be my happy place.
When I first met you, I was always thinking, yeah, definitely South Carolina farm boy. I mean, you just exuded that just like the second we started talking.
Yeah, you see my shoe claws and you're like,
Yeah. I know. Hey, I was
something
going to
doesn't
say
add up.
the blazer lows. I like those. All right. So do we have any questions from the audience? Let's see. There's got to be some questions. Anyone? Bueller? Oh, all the way in the back. Can you project?
Don't worry, I can project.
Oh my! Wow.
Little person with a big mouth. How do you feel about the convergence of, you talk about all the brands, but what about on the media side? So, can't help but plug Vistar a little bit on the out-of-home side. Of course, you mentioned
3 mentions out of home, people. 3.
an interest in that element, but you talk about things like TikTok as well and how there's a viral component to it. Have you thought about kind of using almost like some of the creative assets from something like a social platform and using the canvas of some of these out-of-home screens, and same thing with video as well? Just thinking about how that can be flipped as well, of using video that could sit within the CTV space and maybe leveraging it elsewhere, because I think sometimes creative can get a little stale, and that there's so much more you can do with it to sort of fit all these different brands and reach some of these other audiences.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So yes, I mean, in the sense of it's a big pivot for our brands to think about what content is going to mean. You know, even when we were having this conversation 3 years ago with like the influx of like personalization within digital, now we have personalization within video as a whole, personalization and out of home. So the amount of content that we need is overwhelming a lot of times. So one thing we're leaning into DCO just as a whole, right? So DCO through the means of not only social but also digital, and now we're even thinking about how DCO in more premium video, so OTT, CTV, as well as out of home. The one thing I do caution our brands on, though, is not to assume that you can just have a plate of content that works everywhere. So it is truly about creating for the platforms that you want to display on it versus just taking one vertical and just putting that across Snap, TikTok, like, and YouTube bumpers on mobile, right? Like it needs to be appropriate for the platform. But I love the idea of taking like viral content that we've already created and seeing if it works. But I think you have to have the learning agenda and a measurement strategy, right, to understand, is it actually appropriate for that channel, and is it making the impact to the audience that you want it to? But I think we all have to figure that out. And our creative agency partners, luckily, I don't have to deal with that side of the house, but I know it's not a fun conversation right now for all of them to figure out what all of this looks like.
So you're fairly, and Travis, I don't know if you remember me. I moderated you when you were at Uber.
Oh my God,
in the
yeah,
middle
yeah, yeah.
of the COVID
Yeah.
pandemic. We talked a
Yeah.
no mask, no ride.
Yeah.
Uh,
Adweek's Media Plan of the Year 2021, you mean? Yes.
there you go.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Gosh. Oh my goodness.
No, and I love the social aspect. That was a fun time. But just a more, you're fairly new in the role. Also, a lot of the brands were purchased for like recently. Um, where are you in the company on the maturity curve of pulling all of those data assets together, all of your first party assets? Because I'm assuming you're still semi early, but the way you're talking, it sounds like you've made a lot of headway. So.
I will say the company has made tons of headway. There's also a long ways to go, and there will be. But I think there's definitely a concerted effort right now to make sure that everything is functioning properly now before any other changes. Kind of like moving forward. The cool thing about though Inspire, which is one of the reasons I came, is like there's so much effort put on this though. So it's not just this like, oh yeah, we need to all be on the same like data spine or we all need to be on the same MarTech. It's like, no, you're gonna do it, right? Like, and there's gonna be tons of resources. Like our CTO, he came from Sephora, like he was their CTO, like, we just have this incredible pool of talent from Amazon and Target and Walmart and a lot of the CPGs. And we're kind of taking the best of and not trying to look at it through a restaurant lens versus we're kind of a tech company, in the way that we're setting ourselves up. So there's a lot more to do, but I would say that we're really far along that journey, further than I would think a company in our maturity as an actual holding company would be.
Could be a retail network later, huh?
Who knows?
Thank you.
It's known as Sage Barstool Sports. Binged the Uber show this weekend. A lot to unpack there. But one comment he made I thought was really interesting. Two drives, and I think they have the customer for life. So you're going from a category where Uber really owned it to lunch and dinner. I walk out my door, there's a million choices. How do you kind of switch that mindset, and how are you kind of attacking some of the other restaurants? How are you playing up your brands?
Yeah.
What's that story and change look like?
Yeah, one thing I would say though, I think that comment that the TK had was probably relevant when Uber started. I don't think it is anymore. I mean, we saw that. Like it's convenience, it's not loyalty. So I mean, probably most of the people in this room, like most people are dual apping, right? Like you're seeing what's going to get to you faster, what's going to get to you cheaper. So it's not as sticky as it used to, but I definitely hear it. I think for us, it is more about understanding our consumer and what they want from us. When I think about loyalty, especially, it's a mutual exchange of goods. A consumer is giving us a lot of information about them, and in return, they're expecting for us to give them something back. And they're also expecting us to know what they want. Some consumers want points. Some consumers want, buy four, get one. Some consumers want ease of ordering right through the app. We as marketers and as a brand, like we have that information, we have that data. So it's our responsibility because it is a right to have all of that data to make sure that we're communicating and giving our consumers what they want. So I think that's the biggest thing is just like asking and giving, right? Versus assuming. Because I think so many brands have taken this assumption process of like, we know our brand best, we know what we should be telling people. It's like, no, like to your point, there's so many choices. So we have to do everything to make sure that every opportunity that we're giving them to purchase from us is exactly what they want, whether it be through app, through drive-through, through delivery. It doesn't matter. It's up to them, and we shouldn't push one or the other.
Travis, quick question on the Pusha T collaboration. Is that something that generated from your team or from Publicis?
So that
Be
actually
careful.
was
There's a whole the Coinbase guy, or not the Coinbase guy, the guy who said his agency didn't do the thing. Be careful.
Oh, yeah, no. Oh, I think you actually probably saw my post about that. I was like, what the fuck?
Agencies do work.
Yeah, so I like won't hire anyone on my team unless they've had agency training. It's the best training ground and it's amazing. So actually we had that for a while actually. So kind of pre-Publicis and it didn't really seem like the right thing or the tone to be pushing out, during the pandemic and it was kind of opportune. So it was more of a timing side, but it was in collaboration with one of our creative agency partners as well as our internal brand team. But they had been sitting on it for a while, which makes it even more fun because we're like, and go.
I got a question for you. So so all the data you have, it's funny because spending so much time in like consumer health, I went from cable where you had tons of data to consumer health where it's like, I never knew if that audience that was giving us their information was actually the audience I wanted to target or just a coupon person. You've got a bunch of data just on like, again, ordering, what they eat, where they eat, all those things. How do you fill in like the rest of the audience profile beyond that? Because I don't, you know what I mean? Like I don't want to,
Yeah.
I don't want to stereotype as who eats at your places, but like, how do you figure that other piece out?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of it is like we just have a bunch of partners, right? That like we think about enrichment in a very compliant and a smart and non-creepy way, right? So like, we're deep, with Cardlytics, right? And understanding just kind of purchase behavior there, right? Like I said, we Epsilon, part of Publicis, part of our bespoke agency model. Epsilon has so much data, right? So if we're able to even think about like media consumption data as an enrichment part of not only what we have, it makes our data better, but then also it's going to make it smarter whenever we're doing targeting as well. There's cool stuff with like, the Ibadas and the Fetches of the world, right? Who are kind of doing like the coupon gaming. Like that's SKU level data, across every single thing that they're buying that, isn't there yet, but like that's really rich data that we can kind of start to look at to enrich in a way that makes a better experience, right, for consumers.
Are you using a clean room?
Yes, we have. Getting back to your question about like all of this coming together, that is one thing we have many right now. We have which I need us to get to a place where we have less clean rooms that don't have silly names.
Well, it's a good ending right there. Anyway, any other questions? Here we go. Oh, we got two now. Good.
You mentioned there's a commitment to kind of start working with more diverse owned suppliers, which I think is fantastic for Inspire. I guess my question is, how are you kind of leaning in beyond that, beyond just the creators and the business owners that might fall within those communities, but touching and communicating, connecting with communities themselves? Yeah, and yeah, just to be clear, like with Inspire, like that's one of my intentions, right? It's not something that we've started, but it's I think the really cool thing about Inspire is like we have such local connection, right, to our communities. We've also been very purposeful in our restaurants to ensure that we also have corporate owned restaurants as well as franchisee owned restaurants, right? So none of our restaurants are 100% franchisee, so we always have that corporate piece. So when we think about a lot of local media, so much of the local media, we've moved most of it to national, right? Just from an efficiency standpoint. But a lot of that funding goes towards like local community, enrichment and making sure that they are a part of, Boys and Girls Club. We're like one of the biggest partners from a national standpoint. Like we're deep in those communities. Like we're helping give back to the communities. We're understanding what those communities need that are very specific, not to that restaurant, but to that community. So we're able to kind of extract that, continue to give, but then also allow for that to give us insights into how we need to show up from a national partner standpoint too. But yeah, I mean, we have so many foundations even within the brands themselves. So like Arby's has their own foundation, Sonic has theirs. So it is very purposeful about giving back to the communities from a local standpoint, which is like the hardest part, right? And we've already done that. So now how do we take it to be something even bigger?
First of all, thank you both. Question about when we'll see, Dunkin' Donuts in Best Buy. So you can shop
Yeah.
there. But real
Can you
quick,
imagine?
talked
We're like,
about each brand having its own voice, and then you talked about cross-selling. How do you balance those two?
Well, can I answer the first one quick? So, Dunkin' box, laptop inside of it, like packaging. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, totally. We'll get on that.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think you can sacrifice brand voice, right? Like just because we're cross-selling, the cross-sell still needs to come authentically from whoever that new brand is speaking to them. We happen to know that they're more likely to convert, that they eat certain things that are found in other places, right? So it's relevant messaging And it's not us, like I think someone said, like I think it was Michael, maybe it's like, we're not going to show like a steak in front of a vegetarian. So we're going to know that, but it still needs to be authentic from the brand that we're trying to get people to go to. Otherwise, the experience is just inauthentic. So I think we use the back end data to understand the who and the why, but then how it comes to life is still very, it can't be compromised, right? Otherwise, we lose some of our authenticity.
Anything else? I think just for the record, I think you should work one day in each one of the restaurants you guys have, and that's like a whole social content in and of itself.
Well, just so there's one that I actually would love to work. So most people don't know. There's a restaurant called Rusty Taco that we own as well. It's mostly in the Midwest, but we're starting to expand it more. It is so good, and they have such good margaritas. So in my mind, I would be. I've never bartended, but in my mind, I would be such a good bartender. So I'm happily available to work at Rusty Taco.
Roller skating on a Sonic, delivering
That too.
That's
Honestly,
what I
I'm
wanna see.
actually when I was like 8 or 9,
Here we go.
I was pretty good. Like I had like the black ones with like the
Just
pink
an
wheels.
onion, right? It's just,
yeah,
just continue to
yeah.
peel these
The
layers.
vents in
My
them. It was
goodness.
great.
Awesome. Well, thank
Okay,
you, Travis,
no problem.
and Megan.